Ladies and gentlemen of the Trackmania community. 3 years ago, I put out a video exposing the truth about Trackmania and the fact that it's not just a racing game, but rather it's a showcase of humanity's hubris and our gluttonous addiction to speed. From the humble beginnings based in reality to the spine-snapping, gravity-shattering, and nitrous-fueled adrenaline rush that we find ourselves in today, Trackmania has never been the same. A well-known individual in the community informed me that the truth was to come out 5 years after the latest installment, but I knew with information like this, I couldn't wait. Even with a bribe thrown in, I wasn't going to falter. To give a quick overview of what we discussed last time, I concluded that because of a legal loophole that the Japanese branch of Trackmania exploited, the International Stadium was exempt from the laws of gravity. This one slight misstep led to the downfall of humanity and forced the remaining drivers and survivors to escape into the clouds and soon after space to continue their antics while AI were employed to take over the driving duties for a population that contained fewer numbers than those above. At the end of my video, I mentioned the upcoming Trackmania 2020 release, and I was eager to see what secrets lie within the code. It's been 3 years, and I think it's time that I return. Now, before we get into the real meat of this video, I want to recap the events from the previous entry with just a little bit more detail here, just so I can be certain that I've got everything covered going into this installment. The timeline of Trackmania follows an exponential thirst for action and speed that eventually led to the end of the world due to the laws of nature being violated. The games themselves act as a timeline that we can follow to the present day. What started off as a humble racing scene that kept things relatively tame soon exploded into a soul-crushing G-force experience that hungered for more, an insatiable appetite that led us flying too close to the sun and dooming the world to an eternal darkness. All of this was orchestrated by the stadium architects in Trackmania Turbo, who somehow managed to find a legal loophole that exempted the stadium from the laws of gravity. This set off a chain reaction that would strip the Earth of its vital resources and led to humanity seeking refuge in the stadium as it took off into the cosmos in search of habitation and a sense of normalcy. While the lucky ones were away, those left behind had nothing better to do than to keel over and die while AI raced around the tracks for their dwindling amusement. Once the last human passed, however, the AI just continued on, blissfully unaware of the situation around them. So now that we're tragically up to speed, it's time to unravel this mess and figure out what's changed in the years since, and to uncover what new secrets lie within. There's been some massive developments in my quest to uncover the truth in the last 3 years. Let's begin from the top. Right away, the stadium has received an upgrade. Larger play space means more room to make tracks that prolong the entertainment, which means we are distracted for a little bit longer. Before, going from one end of the playable area of the stadium to the other took about 15 seconds, and if you account for the space before and after the start and finish lines, you're looking at a little bit over 17 seconds. But with the new stadium, it takes 18 seconds to go from one end of the buildable space to the other, and probably another 2 seconds beyond those, so we're looking at a bit over 20 seconds to go end to end in ideal conditions. A couple of seconds might not seem like a lot, but as we all know in racing, a couple of seconds might as well be a couple of lifetimes. So, a bigger play space is nice, of course, but how did the builders get the material to do so? Remember, we've been in space, based on my evidence, so the only material gathering is coming from either A, planets, or B, asteroids. And if memory serves, there's a handful of other planets in the solar system that could be mined and exploited. let's take a look at the solar system. Mercury and Venus would be out of the question. Smaller than Earth, hotter and faster as well, toxic atmospheres that can't harbor life, we'd be wasting our time trying to work with them. Earth is obviously gone, so that one's out of the question, and the gas giants are far too out there for us to realistically be able to get to extract any sort of elements and then come back. So that just leaves one rocky planet remaining: Mars. I theorize that Mars has been exploited to expand the play space as well as create new blocks and new pieces that could be placed to create more tracks. But how? What's the scale of this operation? What's the time frame for all this? How are we doing this? Let's do this one step at a time. Let's do some quick math so we can figure this whole thing out. Getting from Earth to Mars takes about 7 months with our current technology. After all, this planet is somewhere in the ballpark of 300 million miles away, or 480 million kilometers out. This does include a transfer window when we look at this, a transfer window being a point in the orbit of two planets where a spacecraft can enter the orbit of the other without using too much fuel. On top of that, a trip from Mars could take well over a year to achieve, if not factoring for this little window. But even if we account for possible technological advances in this timeline, the trip may only be cut down by a few months or so at best. So let's say Trackmania, Nadeo, whoever, they're pulling materials from Mars. What is it exactly that they're pulling? The core of Mars is made up of iron, nickel, and sulfur, all of which are used as building materials. Slight problem though, the core is deep in the heart of this planet, around 1900 kilometers down, which makes extraction difficult to say the least. To put that in perspective, the deepest hole ever dug by humans is the Kola super deep borehole in Russia, and that's about 12.2 kilometers deep. The next layer up is, of course, the mantle, somewhere between 1,230 and 1,880 kilometers. Generally a rocky layer, so there isn't much to discuss here, and again follows the same sort of trend as the core, being too deep down to realistically mine from. But the crust is where we may find our answer. Iron, magnesium, aluminum, calcium, potassium, all of these are found in this layer. And why is that significant? Well, to put it in perspective, Earth's crust is made up of a litany of elements like oxygen, silicon, sodium, as well as every other element I just listed. Pretty much everything here can be used as building materials once it's been refined. Okay, so if we're getting materials from Mars but we still remain in the sky, why aren't we just planting ourselves down there on the surface, putting a flag into the soil and starting anew? Well, the issue with that lies no further than the atmosphere of this planet. To make things easier, let's do a little bit of a side-by-side comparison. Earth's atmosphere was about 79% nitrogen, 20% oxygen, and that remaining percentage point is made up of several other elements. Mars's atmosphere, on the other hand, is ever so slightly different to our blue marble. The atmosphere on the red planet is made up of 1.9% nitrogen, 1.9% argon, and a plethora of other elements, including oxygen, make up just a meager 0.2% of the atmosphere found on Mars. If we plug all those numbers in, the elements listed make up only 4% of the atmosphere. So if all of that only gives us 4% of the total, what makes up the other 96%? It's carbon dioxide. 96% of it is the stuff that we exhale. This is an atmosphere not suited for life, but for suffocation. No plant or animal can live there comfortably. Even if we tried to live there with an oxygen dome, I don't think there's enough O2 that can be harvested from the atmosphere to balance out our humanistic consumption. We'd have to import what oxygen we could from other planets if that were the case, and the only viable candidate would be Mercury, with 42% of its atmosphere containing oxygen. And don't even suggest terraforming the planet. We don't have to get too far into that discussion to realize that putting water on the surface, creating soil that's suitable for life, creating a new atmosphere, importing plants and animals, and making sure that all of it plays nicely with each other, requires far more power and brain power than what we currently have available. Now, to be fair, Mars was a lot like Earth at one point in time, a point in time that has long since passed after all of it was swept away by solar winds hundreds of millions of years ago, and any water that could be used to start terraforming is frozen underground. If we brought it to the surface, it would be blown away and evaporated into space. So, in conclusion, making Mars into a new planet would take far too long and require far more power than we have, which is why we have not touched down on the surface just yet. But I did mention asteroids earlier. What about them? Well, the closest part of the asteroid belt to Earth was 111.5 million miles away. That's just under 180 million kilometers. Or, if we want to be fancy, 1.2 AUs away. An AU standing for astronomical unit. An AU is the distance from Earth to the Sun. So how far does one need to go in order to obtain 1 AU of distance? 93 million miles. So what's the deal? Where are we? Well, if I'm a betting man, we may be orbiting Mars, far enough out so that it isn't noticeable, and angled in such a way so that it's, quote, beneath us and out of sight. Drones or workers were sent to the surface of Mars to gather resources and expand the play space, keeping it behind a clever bit of camouflage until their project was completed. And how long did this take? Well, it's anybody's guess, really, but of course it would have to have taken place between Trackmania 2 Stadium and Trackmania 2020. So, however long you consider that to be. Let's switch gears and look at the car. At first glance, you can tell that there's been a change. It's more compact, it's pod-like, there's an active aerodynamic system that comes out at a certain speed, the tires appear to be held on by some magnetic force, and we've gone fully electric. There's no exhaust pipes, so no flames are spitting out when we change gears or go over a boost pad. For a situation like this is a fine change. We don't have the oil reserves as far as I'm aware, but I don't think it's outside the realm of possibilities for some oil to have been saved by those Nadeo overlords to have a few massive reserves hidden off somewhere we haven't been able to find. I have a feeling that they exist, I just haven't gotten anything concrete on that yet. But an electric car in this sense does work. Use the sun to charge up the batteries, make a gearing system so that it's close to gasoline-powered cars, and you're good to go. Plus, the stadium car is able to make use of thrust going either up or down with different strengths, leading to the car being sucked to the surface or hovering in the air for a short duration. I don't know how this is possible, but they've found a way to do it. All of this sounds fine and dandy, it's great even. But going over the car with a more thorough manner of inspection, I noticed something was missing. Where's the headrest? No, seriously, where is it? Look at past iterations of this car. There's a headrest here, there's a headrest here, there's a headrest here. Even other open-wheeled series cars will have some sort of headrest to protect the driver or a halo depending on what series we're talking about. What do we get now? A little bar that comes up at an agonizingly slow speed. Not much that can do to protect the driver in a fast rollover, much less a literal head-on collision with a wall or a barrier. It's like they want us to perish in an accident and then cover it up as only a driver error and not even talk about the idea of it being a safety issue. Oh, but I've had a friend crash headfirst into a barrier and live to race another day. I've had a friend roll over during a race and he was fine. I'm sure you have. I'm sure you've seen those and had those friends. I'm sure they're just fine, right? It's still them under that helmet. You've checked, right? One rather recent addition to the game is the spectator bleachers. In the past, there were no people in any spectator booth of any kind. Of course, this is due to my previous video that states the populations of humanity were dead and forgotten, therefore, spectators weren't really needed. But here, we have life, we have people, we have fans, friends, families, loved ones, we have mannequins. Cold, plastic, lifeless, not a drop of blood in them. All frozen in various poses, making the drivers feel like the stars they should be. Some of you managed to pick this out, and I commend those individuals for being vigilant. But there's something far more disturbing to the mannequins we see lining our tracks. They aren't real. Not by a long shot. You ever launch your car into the stands? Ever notice how not one person runs to safety? What happens when you finally reach them? You just phase right through. They were never real to begin with. They're just here to compound the loneliness you've been feeling. When a driver ultimately snaps from this crushing loneliness they feel, they're gonna send their car into the stands as an act of rebellion against their overlords. Despite the car that has mass and physics attached to it, the car goes right through the spectators without a scratch. That's why there's almost never any protection in the form of catch fences or reinforced windows. Why would you need to protect that which doesn't require it? My working theory here is that the spectators we see are projections either from the stands themselves or through the driver's helmet in some sort of heads-up display. But so what? The spectators aren't real and we can drive through them. What's the big deal? Or maybe they are real and we just don't know it, right? Sure, we can argue those day in and day out, but there's one way and one way only to prove that these spectators aren't real. Load up any replay at all. Any replay that has spectator stands on them. You can even render it out if your heart so desires. Once it's done, take a look as the car is driving around. Do you notice anything different? No one's there. No one was ever there to begin with. Oh, but I can add this thing here, and I can put the spectators back in. I can even control how many spectators are shown. Congratulations. You're doing and believing exactly what Nadeo wants you to believe. That's why sending the car into the stands isn't an issue and isn't immediately taken action on. Drivers who can see past the lies will find out the truth that will drive them to madness. What happens after that, I'm not too sure, but there's one thing I can be certain of, and that's that they never end up being the same afterwards, if there even is an afterwards to be considered. When people discuss the fall of civilizations, they may bring up the bread and circus point, that being the ruling class would put on circuses to distract the public when nefarious deeds were carried out behind the scenes, away from prying eyes and meddling hands. It's a way for the people to be entertained and even interact while their lives were slowly being torn away from them. Now, whether or not this is true is debated to no end, but here in Trackmania, we have our own bread and circus. And it's the Royal mode. And Royal is just that. It's an amazing digital circus. Fun colors, a wealth of courses to test a driver's skill and grit in a way that isn't all too serious, and teams named after fruits instead of animals like before. It's all just a big spectacle to keep us distracted. Just some friendly competition between pals because we just want to have some fun. Who cares what the outcome is? We're just here to kick back, relax, and do some funny plastic bounces or wait for the pistons to move or something like that. We can even take a dip in the pool because of how much we're exerting ourselves. Say that last part again for me. Take a dip in the what now? Remember when I said the water floated away from Earth all those years ago, and the quote-unquote water we were dealing with was some other, like, oily substance? Where did this water come from? And here's the thing, this is behaving a lot like real water. Cars don't bounce off the top of it, but rather they glide for a moment at a certain speed before sinking. The car doesn't float around in that zero gravity-like way from before. It's always going to right itself so the tires are on the ground. And the way the tires will remain wet after coming back up to the surface and having an effect on the driving as well is a huge step up compared to the earlier forms of this liquid. I mean, we're probably under the impression that water is scarce, so we need to be careful, only using what we need and saving the rest for everyone else. Yet we're able to put on these little shows filled to the gills with the stuff. Really makes you wonder what else they're hiding. It was once stated, two possibilities exist. Either we are alone in the universe, or we are not. Both are equally terrifying. Our Milky Way galaxy is about 1 quintillion kilometers across. That's just about 100,000 light years in diameter. We've scoured it for signs of life, broadcasting ourselves to the stars for decades and centuries. We've begged the cosmos to answer our calls, give us something to work with, but time and time again, we were met with silence. At least, that's what the past has dictated. But as the hands of time move us forward, the possibilities of breaking the shackles of the past move with it. And we've made contact. We've made contact with an alien civilization that goes by Cupra. How we made contact and why they haven't wiped us out is beyond me, but one thing's for certain. Their presence wasn't an accident. When the world fell apart and caused the apocalypse, something must have triggered for the Cupra, and they came as quickly as they could. Just look at everything they have. Cities of neon, plant life, towering skyscrapers, and technologies not even the greatest minds of our species could have put together. Going from what we had back then to what we have now and what could become our reality, the Cupra have seen something in humanity and have granted us safety in return for something I'm not too sure of. But I have a theory. You see, civilizations can be ranked by something known as the Kardashev scale. This scale was proposed by Soviet astronomer Nikolai Kardashev back in the 1960s and is used to measure the technological advancements of a civilization based on the energy it's capable of using. Type 1 is when we're able to access all of the energy available on our planet and store it effectively. There's discussions about whether or not weather control should be included here, but that's a story for another day. A Type 2 civilization is able to pull energy directly from its star using something like a Dyson sphere, which is a hypothetical megastructure that encapsulates an entire star and captures a large amount of its energy output. This energy can then be used in a much more efficient way for the betterment of that civilization. And Type 3 is able to wrangle the unforgiving nature of galaxies and everything in it. This includes stars, planets, and most importantly, black holes. So where does that put us? Were we barely a Type 1 civilization, something we managed to achieve before everything went on a downward spiral? Or were we an atom's width away from becoming that Type 1? Or maybe we weren't even a quarter of the way to begin with. Some of the greatest minds of our species have ever produced categorized Earth as a Type 0.72 civilization. Our planet has been around for billions of years, and despite humanity's most selfish efforts, we haven't even made it onto the first rung of the ladder. But Cupra, where would they be? Certainly higher than a Type 1, I think we can all agree, but are they a Type 2, Type 3, something in the middle? If I had to give an educated guess based on what I've seen, we may be dealing with a Type 2 civilization at best, and even if they weren't at that point, I would give them at least a 1.5. Not quite as impressive, but still very noteworthy. But why would a higher civilization take a weaker one under its wing instead of destroying it for all the resources it holds? It's like the master asking the guy who's attending his first day for advice on an advanced technique. What does Cupra see with humanity that took destruction off the table? Or maybe destruction is still on the table, just not in the way we're thinking. Perhaps it has something to do with the engineer's ability to break the laws of nature. Perhaps there's more to Cupra's might than we can even imagine. Maybe there's something beyond the fold that they're working towards. Something that only humanity can assist in. What I'm about to tell you may put myself in far more danger than I'm already in. What you're about to see must be kept to secrecy. It cannot leave from between the two of us. While on my quest for the truth, I came across mountains upon mountains of files from the highest levels of Nadeo. Having knowledge of these files on its own has put an even greater target on my back. There is more than just the stadium. I'm not lying to you. There is more beyond the stadium walls they've trapped us in. Surely you thought this plane of existence wasn't all there was, right? Alright, listen. There's a world that's just water. Nothing more. It's just one massive pool of water, like an Olympic swimming pool, but on uber steroids. I can't quite pin down where it's located or how it came to be, but just look. That's water. Water they've kept from us, water that could have been used to give us a better life than the one we have. But no. They've kept it to themselves, scooping out enough water for us to drink, enough water to wet the wheels, enough to drown us under the waterfalls, enough for our silly little royal events with our cutesy-fruitsy teams. The water that escaped Earth following the removal of gravity, well, it looks like they found it somehow. Or, more realistically, it's probably the ice from Mars instead. Either way, they found a way to capture it and make use of it. I'm not certain how many gallons of water there are, but it is definitely far less than we had on Earth by quite a significant margin. But that isn't the only thing I've seen. There's another sector of this world where there's just nothing. I know I've mentioned the nothing before in a few different instances, but this is a different kind of nothing. So there's nothing, and then there's nothing, but it acts as a space where tracks can be built. A place where you fall forever, but you're still able to create structures for safety. There's a floor, but there also isn't. It's a stadium within a stadium, an endless void that wears the face of our beloved sky. Not only that, but there's another space in this rabbit hole of worlds, but this one is a little bit different. This one could possibly be our key to vengeance. The thing that will get humanity back on its feet and create an uprising that'll overthrow Nadeo. A grassy plain. Look at this. Based on my calculations, it's as big as that water plane from before. This right here can be used to build homes, begin to sow the seeds for our farms, become a place where we can come together and face a common enemy. All of these spaces exist and they've all been swept under the rug. Nadeo doesn't want us to know about these spaces because they want us to eventually grow accustomed to this new stadium, so that way we never know what true freedom actually feels like. When you give the oppressed the bare minimum for long enough, they'll think that's all there is. That way, the Nadeo overlords can use their massive spaces without a care in the world about those below them finding out. But oh well. Looks like their little secrets are out in the open for all to see. What a shame. Despite all my work here, there's still one thing I've been holding off on. What I'm about to tell you might just break you. What I'm about to say could throw the book out the window and somehow take the whole goddamn library with it. What if I told you that all I've gone over wasn't even the worst of it? Crazier than the plains of grass or water or void, crazier than the spectators not being real people, crazier than the fact that we've made contact with extraterrestrial life and even made an apparent peace with them. This last bit of information was right there the whole time, and not one person picked up on it. Look at the console release trailer and see if you can spot it. Just watch the track. None of this exists. None of it ever existed. Think about it. When was the last time you stepped out of your car? Have you ever touched the grass or felt the heat radiating off the road as you stood on it? Have you ever gotten out and shook hands with the fans, if that was even possible, or snapped a photo with them? No. No, you haven't. You've never left the car or the truck or whatever. Oh, but the podium, you can stand on it, so clearly we've been able to get out of our cars this whole time. Did you ever step out of the car yourself, or did you just appear on the podium standing next to your car? If we could get out this whole time, why didn't we? It's because you've never done any of that, have you? It's because there's a very good reason for that. The stadium isn't real. The car isn't real. None of this was ever real. I don't even think you're real. I'm not even certain if I'm real. Maybe we're all just brains in jars experiencing what should be a racing paradise. And if that's the case, I'm willing to bet that Nadeo is already on their way over to me to smash me into a pile of past tense thoughts and actions. Whatever you do, do not let this fall into darkness. I don't know how long I have left, but I can hear them coming. You have to tell everyone you can about what I found. We're on the brink. We're on the brink of something greater than ourselves. There's still hope. You have to go. Now, go!